Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is a vote on the motion of the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, to suspend the rules and to pass H.R. 1327 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 1327, a bill to extend authorization for the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund of 2001 through fiscal year 2090 and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And with that previous vote, the House passing its $733 billion defense authorization bill, and they'll now have to work out the differences with the Senate. Their measure is at $750 billion. This should be the last recorded vote of the week. It is reauthorizing the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund, authorizing it for another 70 years, expected to cost a 10-year cost of $10.2 billion. We understand that former Daily Show host Jon Stewart is in the gallery, a longtime proponent of the measure, along with families of 9/11 victims in the House gallery today. And we spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter for details on the 9/11 measure.
Michael McAuliffe, congressional reporter for the New York Daily News. The House is set to take up the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. What's the purpose of this fund, and when did it start, and what would the bill do?
Well, the purpose of the fund is to compensate people who are ill or who have died and their families for economic losses and for pain and suffering. It was originally started, right after 9/11, and it lasted for a couple of years, and then it lapsed because they were really focused on, folks who died in that terrible attack. But then it got restarted again in a legislation that passed in 2010, and it lapsed again after 5 years because that's how long Congress gave it, and it got renewed one more time in 2015. But it's the demand for it has really climbed, so it's running out of money a long time before it expires.
How much might the bill cost?
Well, the Congressional Budget Office put out a score this morning, and they put 10 years at $10.2 billion. As you know, that when you do budget scoring, it's a 10-year window, so that's what we go up to.
What members are taking the lead in moving the bill forward and getting it to a vote this week?
Well, in the House, the lead person has really been Carolyn Maloney, even though it's not her committee. Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has the responsibility for getting that legislation out of the committee. And then it hits the floor, and Pete King, the Republican from Long Island, is the other sort of main partner in that triumvirate there. And then over in the over in the Senate, once it passes here, I'm in the House side, it'll be Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand who are sort of shepherding it through.
So it was big news last month when Jon Stewart and several 9/11 responders, including former New York Police Detective Luis Alvarez, came to Capitol Hill, where they testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the legislation. We showed that hearing, by the way, on C-SPAN. A day later, the committee approved the legislation unanimously by a voice vote. What did you learn from the proceedings and the testimony that day? And tell us what's happened since then to Detective Alvarez.
Well, what I sort of learned from watching that is the extent to which sort of official Washington sort of puts the unfolding tragedy of 9/11 sort of out of their mind. And Lou Alvarez, he was so gaunt and so frail when he was testifying, he really brought it home. And then Jon Stewart sort of acted as the conscience, if you will, and chastised folks for not being there. I mean, it was a subcommittee hearing, and there probably wouldn't normally be a lot of people there, but the sort of symbolic weight of it was very powerful. And of course, after that hearing was over, Mr. Alvarez went back to New York, where he was supposed to get his 69th round of chemotherapy, but he was too ill. His liver had stopped functioning, and he died about 2 weeks later.
If the bill does pass the House, what's the current plan for a vote in the Senate?
Well, the current plan is not entirely clear. Majority Leader McConnell has promised that he will act on that legislation before the August recess. So there's a lot of wiggle room in there as to exactly how that gets done. I have heard from at least one Republican that it's not going to go through committee because that might take too long, and it'll go right to the floor. And we'll have to see exactly what sort of method the leader uses to advance it.
Michael McAuliffe of the New York Daily News, thanks for joining us. You can find more information on Michael McAuliffe's reporting on Twitter at @McAuliffe and online at nydailynews.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
On this vote, the yeas are 402, the nays are 12. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the title is amended. Without objection, the title of H.R. 2500 is amended. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington ask for recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the clerk be authorized to make technical corrections in the engrossment of H.R. 2500, including corrections in spelling, punctuation, section and title numbering, cross-referencing, conforming amendments to the table of contents and short titles, the insertion of appropriate headings, and to provide instructions that amendment number 234, printed in Part B of House Report 116-143, be inserted at the end of Subtitle G of Title 28, and that the instruction in amendment number 64, printed in Part B of House Report 116-143, be changed from page 387 after line 7 to page 387 after line 15. And I hope you understood that, because I certainly did not.
Without objection,
we need
so
to- yes.
Without objection,
Thank you.
so ordered.
All yours, sir.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 962, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
Under guidelines consistently issued by successive speakers, as recorded in Section 956 of the House Rules and Manual, the Chair is constrained not to entertain the request unless it has been cleared by the bipartisan floor and committee leaderships. The gentleman is not recognized for debate.